Bienvenue à toutes et tous pour ce webinaire que nous avons organisé. Tout d'abord, quelques considérations techniques et pratico-pratiques. Nous avons donc de l'interprétation. Donc, vous avez le canal d'interprétation en bas de votre fenêtre Zoom pour avoir l'anglais ou le français. Hi everyone. Welcome to this Biodiversity 2030 webinar. First of all, I just want to tell you that we've got simultaneous interpretation, so you can have English, French interpretation at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So please choose either French or English you prefer. Et donc, pour ma part, je vais m'exprimer en français. N'hésitez pas à utiliser également la fenêtre de discussion, de chat pour poser vos questions, évidemment si vous en avez à n'importe quel moment, et nous ferons la synthèse des questions et tâcherons d'y répondre dans les plages horaires prévues pour cela. Donc, bienvenue à toutes et tous. Merci de vous joindre à nous pour ce webinaire qui est en fait un webinaire que nous avons organisé avec toute l'équipe du projet. Donc, Biodev 2030, Biodev 2030, c'est un projet qui est multi-partenaire puisqu'il est coordonné par Expertise France que je représente aujourd'hui, et il est mis en œuvre, comme vous le savez, par l'UICN dans 8 pays partenaires et par le WWF dans 8 autres pays partenaires. Donc, c'est un projet qui met en œuvre un accompagnement pour 16 pays pilotes pour favoriser l'intégration transversale de la biodiversité dans les secteurs économiques. Donc, cette vaste question qu'est, avec le mot bien anglais, le mainstreaming de la biodiversité. Et c'est un moment particulier, là, en ce mois de mai 2022, à la fois pour le projet et à la fois pour la biodiversité, puisque le projet Biodev 2030 a commencé tout début 2020 et que son ambition était vraiment d'accompagner les pays pour qu'il y ait cette intégration sectorielle de la biodiversité, à la fois à un niveau national dans les secteurs économiques clés des pays, mais aussi pour favoriser le portage de ces messages d'une intégration concrète de la biodiversité dans les secteurs économiques, pour que ces messages soient portés dans les instances internationales, puisque 2020 devait être l'année de la biodiversité avec cette fameuse COP 15 qui devait être la COP de l'adoption d'un nouveau cadre mondial pour l'après 2020 extrêmement ambitieux. Cette ambition, nous l'avons toujours, même si finalement, ça n'est pas en 2020 que cette COP a eu lieu, pour les raisons que vous connaissez et qui ont largement affecté toutes les négociations du cadre et aussi, plus particulièrement, les activités de mise en œuvre du projet. Donc, le projet a quand même réussi, malgré les contraintes liées à la pandémie, à accompagner les pays pour la mise en place de plateformes de dialogue. Et c'est vraiment ces instances, ces plateformes qui ont permis de commencer à faire rentrer le mainstreaming de la biodiversité dans les institutions sectorielles publiques et bien sûr aussi les entreprises. Il s'agissait d'abord de faire un diagnostic scientifique des menaces à l'échelle nationale qui pèsent sur la biodiversité, de faire partager ces constats par tous les acteurs et ensuite de faire en sorte que ces constats partagés et appropriés permettent à chacun de se positionner pour le choix de secteurs prioritaires sur lesquels travailler des engagements volontaires sectoriels. Les secteurs ont été choisis et désormais, nous sommes dans la phase vraiment d'élaboration de ces engagements sur la base d'une analyse approfondie de ces secteurs, d'une cartographie des acteurs qui composent ces secteurs et d'une connaissance la plus précise possible des pratiques qui à la fois impactent la biodiversité, mais aussi des pratiques alternatives qui pourraient être les solutions à envisager. Là, c'est l'étape actuelle de Biodev 2030, de notre projet. Mais nous sommes aussi à un moment crucial pour les négociations de la biodiversité, les négociations pour ce fameux cadre mondial de l'après-2020 qui a comme ambition d'accompagner des changements transformatifs pour vivre en harmonie avec la nature. C'est un vaste projet et nous pensons tous, au sein du projet BioDev 2030, que tout ce qui s'est tissé depuis janvier 2020 dans vos pays, ça va alimenter les positions, les réflexions et les arguments pour que ce cadre mondial soit vraiment porté par tous, endossé par chacun et qu'il soit le plus ambitieux et le plus concret possible. Et c'est l'objet de ce webinaire. Aujourd'hui et demain, nous nous réunissons pour parler ensemble de comment est-ce qu'on peut, dans chacun des pays que vous représentez, mettre en place une intégration sectorielle de la biodiversité, un mainstreaming in action. Et donc, comment est-ce que ça se passe dans vos pays et comment faire en sorte que ce qui se passe déjà dans vos pays, ça puisse être porté dans les instances de négociation internationales et ça puisse être répliqué. Comment faire en sorte que vous tous, autour de la table, les 16 pays pilotes, vous puissiez montrer que le mainstreaming que vous êtes en train de mettre en place dans vos pays, c'est déjà des ressources que vous mobilisez pour la mise en œuvre de ce cadre. Et donc, c'est ça qu'on a comme ambition aujourd'hui, d'essayer de faire émerger dans la mesure du possible et dans le temps qui nous est imparti, cette intelligence collective des 16 pays autour du mainstreaming et de chacun des engagements sectoriels qui sont en cours d'élaboration dans les pays. Donc, pour ce webinaire, nous avons été accompagnés par SDL Global Concept, donc ici Olivier Rokundo et Ali Benrian, qui donc ont fait la synthèse que je vous ai envoyée il y a un peu plus d'une semaine sur les enjeux qui existent et qui sont révélés suite aux négociations pré-COP qui ont eu lieu à Genève, les défis qu'il reste à relever pour les négociations de Nairobi pour que, à Kunming, soit adopté un accord ambitieux. Et bien sûr, nous voulons aussi dresser la perspective au-delà de Kunming, parce que cet accord, il existera, il aura une ambition qu'on espère la plus élevée possible, mais rien ne nous interdit au contraire d'être encore plus ambitieux et d'être vraiment dans de la mise en œuvre concrète, au-delà finalement des injonctions de l'accord. Et pour cela, nous avons également la chance d'avoir Hugo Rivera et Didier Babin, ainsi qu'Elisabeth Chouraki, qui représentent le projet Post-2020 EU Framework. Donc, je vais donner la parole à ces partenaires, mais évidemment, d'abord, je vais donner la parole à nos partenaires clés et centraux au sein de BioDev 2030, qui vont dresser le panorama que sont évidemment le WWF et l'UICN, et qui vont chacun dresser le panorama de la lecture de leurs institutions sur les enjeux qu'il y a à relever entre les négociations de Genève et les négociations de Nairobi. Donc, je vais donner tout d'abord la parole au WWF et c'est Monsieur Innocent Maloba qui va porter cette parole ici. Innocent, it's your turn. We can see your screen, but we can't hear you.
But you can hear me now.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yes, thank you very much, Deshon. So I note that it's a very packed session, and I will just quickly give you a view from WWF of where we see action being required, and also taking stock of what has been achieved as at the end of the open-ended working group 3 meeting. So my skin is frozen. Okay, all right, yeah. So from the point of view of WWF, there are critical elements that we think must be there for this post-2020 global biodiversity framework to be considered successful. And these ones relate to from the framework point of view. We've got targets to ensure that we are able to conserve our habitats. These include the protected area targets, speaking to protection of 30% of the land, freshwater, and oceans and ecosystems, in particularly those ones harboring of particular importance to biodiversity, but also nature's contributions to people. We've also include these we also have this to include the restoration of degraded ecosystems globally by 2030, and we really like strong targets reflecting this area. The second point, which is quite important and resonates very well with the BioDev project, is the matter of the footprint. And here, first of all, a number of elements is including among them having an outcome level element in the framework, which should be aiming at reducing by 50% the global footprint of production and consumption by 2030, and it targets the main sectors driving nature loss. I think in many of the BioDev countries, they have already done their own studies and have identified the sectors that impact more significantly on biodiversity, and that already presents a good starting point, particularly if we are talking about the post-2020 period, the post-2022 period, where we're already thinking about implementation. However, we need to secure this in the framework as well. With regards to the implementation mechanism, we also of the view that we need to agree alongside the framework. In fact, as an integral part of the framework, a very strong and effective implementation mechanism, which includes the possibilities and well-timed moments for parties to be able to review, to report, review, and their progress towards the 2030 mission, but also provides them with an opportunity to enhance their actions at appropriate intervals during the implementation of the framework. And this should be in a way done in a way that cuts across the entire framework. So looking at all the goal targets themselves, but also looking at the targets that reflect on the means of implementation, such as capacity building and resources mobilization. With regards to finance, very, very crucial to ensure that we have a significant increase in resources. But at WWF, we're actually looking at the resources mobilization from a much more comprehensive approach, which includes a significant increase in resources. I think those of us who are in Geneva know how it went with this proposal for increased resources from all sources. I think we would like that this is achieved, the significant increase in the resources from all sources, and this finance should actually be new and additional. But in addition to this finance, there are also critical elements which relate to addressing the effective use of the resources and also redirecting financial flows towards protection of biodiversity. So whether that means private and public resources, it's very important that an additional measures and we develop additional targets very strongly to ensure that all the parties are able to ensure that financial flows are nature positive. And lastly, there is an element of repurposing all perverse incentives by 2030. These are critical because they are one of the major drivers of biodiversity loss, and they need to be repurposed or eliminated by the year 2030. We've also got other enabling areas, and that includes the nature-based solutions, which are important for ensuring synergy between climate action and biodiversity conservation. But these ones should be implemented in a way that is equitable and with all the safeguards that are required for both the people and the environment. All these needs to be warped together into a very compelling mission that can inspire people across all sectors of society, from government, from business, from civil society, into giving them a direction of what exactly is we are aiming to achieve, and in that way also provide them with a hint on what could be their contributions to that. And for WWF, we think this mission needs to include two critical elements, which is first of all, reversing the loss of biodiversity, halting and reversing the loss of biodiversity, and making sure that we've got more biodiversity in 2030 compared to now. So that will be achieving a nature positive world. And all these must be delivered through a rights-based approach, particularly respecting the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, and also most importantly, take on a whole of society approach, which means the contributions of all players, stakeholders, from the parties themselves to the businesses to the civil society, should count towards the implementation of this global biodiversity framework to achieve our noble mission. I think I would like to stop here and just to go back to the element of the footprint, which I would like to spend a little bit more time on, and also mention that while we in Geneva, we noted a significant gap between what we have known to be the political commitments at high level. I think there are various commitments that have been made, starting from the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. I think the G7, different countries have made commitments at different stages. However, we see that there's a bit of a disconnect when you compare these commitments at the high level and the negotiations on the table. So a lot of effort is needed to close this gap, particularly as we move to the fourth and perhaps the last meeting, the last negotiation opportunity that we've got for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. With regard to the transformative approaches that are required to address the drivers of biodiversity loss, we singled out quite a number that are quite important. And this one includes the identification and the transformation of key productive sectors, key amongst them the food systems and agriculture. So adoption of the agroecological principles and ecosystem approaches in the investments in agricultural and food production, actually entire food chain, ensuring sustainable and healthy diets, and then also the element of restoring and enhancement of soils to ensure that we have healthy and fertile soils, and most importantly, also taking care of the pollinators that are critical for the food production, for a great deal of the food that we produce. We also need to address the unsustainable fisheries, by particularly targeting the overexploitation of native wild species, and then maximizing or rather minimizing the impact on non-target species that are also brought into the net. With regards to infrastructure, I think that there was a bit of a gap in terms of what we would like to see a strong language on infrastructure, because we really like that infrastructure, and also looking at the report that Biodem has prepared, infrastructure has been identified through a number of countries as one of those sectors that impact on biodiversity. So we need measures to ensure that unavoidable impacts of infrastructure are minimized, and where possible, place more focus or premiums on nature and natural infrastructure. At the question of consumption and production, quite important. I already did talk about the need to ensure the net global consumption of all materials is being reduced by at least 50%. Of course, in a fair and in equitable way, to taking care of making sure that we've got what we might consider to be a just transition, addressing plastic pollution with the aim of eliminating plastic pollution as much as possible, and then also having strong targets on pesticides and the loss of nutrients to the environment. I would like to go to the fourth the element. I think I spent quite a lot of time on resources mobilization when I was explaining the infographic, but on the implementation mechanism, I think I would like just to stress that this is also required to be significantly strengthened in the framework and also adopted at the same time as we will be adopting the framework. I noticed that this is perhaps one of those areas that we in the African continent have a long way to go in terms of reaching a position in the global biodiversity framework on the implementation mechanism. So I would like to stop here, Deschamps, Madam Deschamps, and perhaps if there's a session for interaction, pretty much welcome them. Thanks.
Many thanks, Innocent, and very interesting talk. And we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end of this session. So now, after the WWF vision, now I would like Céline to present IUCN vision. Can you please take the floor, Céline? Oh no, it's you, Vicky. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Merci pour l'invitation. However, I will continue in English. I think it's going to be easier for me. It would come as no surprise. I didn't prepare a slide, so I apologize for that. It's going to be very fast. Most of the things that you're going to hear from me, you heard also from WWF. But that comes as no surprise, given that WWF is an IUCN member, and some of these positions are shared and were agreed upon at the World Conservation Congress. So, like I mentioned, I will be sharing with you IUCN's views on the negotiations for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, with the hope that it will spark some ideas and inspiration for concrete outcomes out of this workshop. And of course, eventually for a successful COP that will adopt an ambitious and, more importantly, a transformational framework. So a little bit of history. In 2010, parties to the CBD adopted a vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. And that vision was confirmed in 2018 at COP14. So what is being negotiated now is basically how do we get there? What's the approach and what are the actions needed to be there? So probably a good starting point would be to agree on what do we want to be, to where do we want to be in 2030, what needs to have happened by then. So like I mentioned, at the World Conservation Congress, members decided that where we need to be is to halt and reverse biodiversity loss to achieve a nature positive world by 2030. So we know now that conservation works, but nature, however, continues to decline at unprecedented rates. So that means that more needs to be done, not only in terms of scale, like to actually do more, but it also means that we need a change in paradigm. So the famous transformative change, and part of it is to embed nature in every aspect of decision making, and that holds true for governments and businesses, financial sector, and regular citizens. So just for la petite anecdote, as they say in French, the mission for 2020 was also to take action to halt the loss of biodiversity, to ensure that by 2020, ecosystems are resilient and continue to provide essential services, thereby securing the planet's variety of life. So it's a long, long mission, but it hasn't changed that much. So this is the need why 2020 needs to be, the post-2020 needs to be transformative. Things cannot go business as usual, because here we are. So for IUCN, in addition to conserving at least 30% of each terrestrial, freshwater, and marine ecosystems through equitably governed and effectively managed protected areas, and also in addition to scaling up species conservation to prevent extinctions, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework must also recognize the contribution of sustainable production systems, including agriculture, aquaculture, fisheries, and forestry, to biodiversity conservation and to enhance ecosystem services. So also integrating, like our colleague mentioned before, the integration of nature-based solutions in the framework to address climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, but also to maintain other nature contributions to people, such as water quality, quantity, air protection for disasters, natural hazards, etc., is also important. So some of these, like agroecological principles and practices, and ecosystem-based management in fisheries, in aquaculture, and other approaches like ecosystem-based adaptation that work with natural processes have been found by scientists in the latest IPCC report to have found to support food security, nutrition, health, well-being, livelihoods, and biodiversity. So this is quite important also for this framework to take this into account. And finally, the integration of nature into economic and financial policies across government departments through eliminating, redirecting, and reducing subsidies harmful for nature needs to complement a significant increase in financial resources. So financial flows, like was mentioned before, needs to be shifted from nature negative to nature positive activities and investments with the actual metrics that can support and demonstrate positive outcomes for biodiversity conservation. So a recent study, for example, estimates that about 30% of global biodiversity footprint is embedded in international trade. So for IUCN, the amount of financial resources allocated domestically versus internationally should take actually into consideration the amount of domestic versus international impacts of economic activities on biodiversity. So that's why IUCN supports the assessment and reporting of businesses on their impacts and dependencies on biodiversity among the actions to be completed by 2030. So from the negotiations in Geneva and the heavily bracketed text that we've all seen, we see that parties want to see reflected what is important to them. And that's one of the reasons we have this so-called Christmas tree approach. So going forward, I think it's important to parties to remember that this is a global framework, that it's meant to provide direction and common goals, like I mentioned at the beginning. So the details of how it be implemented will largely depend on national priorities and circumstances. So, and I will take this opportunity just to emphasize the importance of NBSAPs, that they cannot be overstated. And this is why I think where the BioDev project can play a crucial role in forming the update of NBSAPs and national plans with its science-based methodology, and the fact that it provides a multi-stakeholder platform for discussion that would ensure buy-in from key sectors, which is a crucial element and will ultimately determine the success of the implementation of the framework. So that's all that I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. This was very, very interesting and very accurate for this discussion. And then after these two very clear presentation from WWF and IUCN, I would like to welcome another partner, which is the project Post-2020 EU Framework, and Hugo Rivera, the team leader, will give a short talk to give the perspective of this discussion for what will come after COP15.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today on these discussions. We're very much looking forward to what all the participants will discuss today. Can you please confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, we do. It's perfect.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. We are very pleased and happy, as I said again, to have been invited to join you today. I represent the project Post-2020 Biodiversity Framework EU Support. It's a project also implemented by Expertise France with European financing, dedicated in its first phase to supporting the discussions for an ambitious global biodiversity framework, and in a second phase now, thinking about how to best trigger and kickstart the implementation of hopefully a GBF that we will have very soon. So today I was asked to talk about what the project has observed related to the topic of mainstreaming, And we have heard before from my colleagues from WWF and from IUCN, and this is something that you will also hear from Ali and Olivier later, that there has been lots of decisions, and you know it probably also, lots of decisions at the CBD level related to mainstreaming. Most of them had to deal with integration of biodiversity in certain sectors. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about biodiversity, we have to take care of all the elements related to this. The conceptual level, where you have to talk about how to integrate biodiversity at the national planning or subnational planning level in all other sectoral policies, plans, and strategies. At the operational level, in the sense that you have the right action plans, that you use the correct tools, for instance, national capital accounting or other tools, in order to guide you through implementation. This is something that is very, very strongly linked to the capacity to measure the impact of certain policies, to monitor and evaluate the impact also of activities that have been done on the ground, but also on the actual implementation, which has a very, very strong it has a very strong element of financing. So you need the financial means to do so, and not only from public funds. So my colleagues before me were talking about visions and talking about what we are talking about, and I think that's a very good thing to remind us that we do have a common vision. We had it with the concept of living in harmony with nature. We have it now again with the concept of transformative change that has been gaining traction. And we have it also with the concept of nature positive, something that has been defended and pushed by civil society and by many actors as a means to ensure that there's a vision of having more nature in economic activity, more nature in policy, more nature in consumption and production, more nature in everything we do. For us as a project, this means that we need that this is not just a process related to environmental policy. It's not just a process related to economic policy or social policy. It's a process that involves the whole of society. It involves change. It involves behavioral change, and that is something that there is very difficult to achieve and very difficult to measure. So let me check if I can go to my next slide, because my internet is not very good. I'm sorry. So we have tried to think about as a project, what does transformative change means to us as a project within our activities. And we have taken a look at some of the inputs from the IPES global assessment of a European science project called Eclipse, that dealt also with the topic of transformative change and biodiversity. And we identified certain approaches that we consider a good starting point in order to implement a future GBF. Many of them have already been addressed by my previous speakers, addressing indirect drivers and not only direct drivers of biodiversity loss. The second point is very important for us. As we were talking about behavioral change, sometimes pilot projects, sometimes first approaches, first experiments can be a door opener to a more ambitious change, and addressing subsectors instead of a whole sector can also have a very big impact as the starting point for a more ambitious implementation. Expanding the stakeholders involved, never working with the same group, but always bringing new elements, new visions, new opinions into the discussions, and also identifying co-benefits and addressing risks, which is something that, for instance, the private sector has been doing very well. The World Economic Forum with its risk assessments showing that we're at a turning point where our economic activity is dependent, is in danger of not being sustainable, and that we won't be able to continue with business as usual. My colleagues have also talked about inclusive and transformative processes in order to raise the commitment and the ownership of all actors at the national level, at the national, subnational level, and certainly also at the multilateral level for the different instruments that we're creating, and also foresee and mitigate resistance. When I do a major change in policy, in economic activity, there will always be certain groups or certain persons who will have, who will lose influence, will lose income, etc. And these are things that need to be addressed and taken care of. We did a small 4-page study last year with some colleagues from UWSMC, with Abisha and John, and they identified some elements that you will that will seem familiar to you because they were all already shown by the previous speakers. As you see, embedding biodiversity into all economic and social and sectoral planning at the national level is key. Having policy coherence across environmental agendas is nothing new. Making sure that you have multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral, and when I say multi-sectoral, I mean also at the level of government, but not only, that you have partnerships. Also taking care of environmental harmful subsidies and making also sure that you build incentives on the long run to promote the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. All this needs capacity to develop and use tools, to monitor, evaluate, to implement, and also not only rely on public funds, but try to engage with the private sector, with the finance sector, trying to find common pathways for everyone. And of course, I was saying before, measuring impact, having the right indicators, having the capacity to monitor and evaluate is key. So these same authors had some conclusions that I tried to adapt a little bit for today here, that perhaps can help your discussions. One would be that the GBF and the MBSAPs, of course, must be the guidings, or can be the guiding documents and the vehicle by which we can implement biodiversity policy that helps us reach the vision of living in harmony with nature. Also aligning the long-term approach to mainstreaming and its action plan to the new GBF targets is a recommendation. More regional and international cooperation for sure. Spatial planning as an element to show the different needs in terms of resources, natural and capital, natural capital, economic capital, etc. And as a base for discussions and negotiations on how to address mainstreaming. And I have a last slide. I wish to thank my colleague Didier Babin from the project, who came up with some thoughts that were informal, but I thought they were quite eye-opening, and I wanted to give this to you on our for our discussions these days. And it's about the need to integrate negative environmental and social impacts and or externalities into economic activities and trade. The reason is that we are treating natural, human, and economic capital as interchangeable and endless, and this is something that goes with coming into a depth in terms of, for instance, natural capital, and having a system or a gross national product that benefits from the exploitation of nature without taking care of considering the environmental costs that it's and the risks that it's producing. So what we're talking about is a change or a shift in paradigm, meaning thinking anew the way that we organize trade, that we organize economic activity, that we organize social policy, sectoral policy, and that we as a society also, as consumers, as citizens, think about this and act differently and make things differently. And that's at the core of transformative change. So when we're talking about the GBF, the maximum level of ambition as a guiding light for us is what we think or consider would be most helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo, for this perspective and the ideas you gave us to put forward in our discussions. And then I will let Ali present the overview of the synthetic report you and Olivier drafted, and I sent it to you, all participants, last week. So this is like a summary of the report.
Thank you, Pauline. Just to confirm also, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And so, hi everyone. I'm Ali Benrian from SDI Global Consult. Bonjour à tout le monde. And today we'll be presenting the elements that were already shared with you in the synthetic notes. So basically how BioDev 2030 countries and their sectoral commitments, how do they link with the post-2020 JBF negotiations, and how we can look towards developing a common vision and position on mainstreaming and its contribution to resource mobilization ahead of the first meeting of the open-ended working group on the GBF. So of course, we've all seen, especially distinguished national focal points who are with us today. We've all been following very closely the negotiation of the post-2020 GBF, and that its open-ended working group has been mandated with advancing the preparations for it and the various drafts that were developed. So basically where we stand now is that after the resumed session of the SABSTA 24 and SPI 3, and we had the last meeting, as was discussed just earlier by our colleagues, the meeting in Geneva, we currently have a lot of recommendations, a lot of bracketed text. So the negotiations are still difficult. And so we have 11 recommendations by SABSTA, about 20 by SBI, but we have one last chance in Nairobi to develop common ground in order to have something that can be finalized at COP15. So very quickly at SABSTA 24, we addressed a lot of things, but also with regards to what we are discussing today and issues on mainstreaming and resource mobilization, we took a look at the GBO5, the fifth edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook, and there were specific agenda items that covered some key points for us, especially the item on scientific and technical information to support the review of goals, targets, and indicators. And on the right side, I will not go into it. We are a little bit short on time, but you can look at the various relevant indicators of the monitoring framework. And basically, there is a call, and this is also something that was previously shared by our colleague from IUCN for COP to encourage parties to use these headline indicators in their national planning processes that are key. So NBSAPs are key and are considered the key tool in helping to implement the GBF. On the SBI side, it was also the same. We have a lot of recommendations, but a strong final recommendation on mainstreaming of biodiversity across key sectors. And there is a special group, actually informal advisory group on biodiversity mainstreaming that was referenced several times in order to develop a long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity, and that has been fully integrated in the GBF, which is a tool for mainstreaming, basically. So the final recommendation on resource mobilization, on the other hand, they make references to the interlinkages between resource mobilization and the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming. So there is a very strong link already established there, and the importance of biodiversity mainstreaming to strengthen, to be used for resource mobilization or like my colleague Pauline said earlier, which is mainstreaming being a form of resource mobilization in some effect, so that if we can use effectively and efficiently financial resources, we can better support the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And all of this underlines the importance of biodiversity mainstreaming in order for us to value the biodiversity and the services that it provides us. So when we look at mainstreaming, and apologies, my presentation has been a little bit cut off here, but basically what we understand is that we want to ensure biodiversity and its benefits are correctly and fully included in policies and the practices that we depend on. And concerning the alignment of activities and financial flows with the biodiversity values, we've all seen the various requests to refer to the goals and aims with regards to reaching this objective. So the concepts of sustainable development and poverty reduction are already fully integrated into biodiversity mainstreaming. But the one key point that's of concern to most countries is the access to how to access financial flows and how that can be strengthened. So basically, there is indeed a consensus on the need of resource mobilization, but how do we get there? Well, there is a need for transformational change, and this has been already stated. We understand that it's behavioral change. We need to change basically the way that we think. We've developed a lot of bad habits with regards to biodiversity. And so we need to see how we can redirect these anti-biodiversity incentives, how we can increase the effectiveness of how we use these resources after we've been able to mobilize them, and the need to develop national financial strategies for this GBF at the national implementation level of the GBF. So the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming, and which was developed, and it is called mainstreaming of biodiversity within and across sectors and other strategic actions to enhance implementation, was developed as a draft in March 2021. And so beyond the basic principle, there are some very interesting things that we can dive deeper into to understand. And here are some key questions that we can consider. First, how do we integrate external environmental elements in prices and services that depend on and exploit natural resources? And also, we should think about how do we transition towards models that take into account the natural capital into the economic exchanges across various sectors? And how do we move on beyond the cost of ecosystem restoration so that we can take into consideration the cost of this transformative change? Because it incurs many costs. We were talking about transitioning practices, insurance costs, investment costs in various economic sectors, because we're talking about multiple sectors that we'll be touching upon into very soon. So there is some headline actions, and there is a lot of recommendations, especially headline action 3, which makes direct reference to businesses and how we can actively make them transition towards more sustainable practices by using newer technologies, by integrating mainstreaming better through the value chains, and how we can more positively impact ecosystems. And under BioDev 2030, the team and all its partners have established that there are several key sectors which are agriculture, fisheries, mining, forestry, energy, and infrastructure, that the BioDev 2030 pilot countries have identified as key for their mainstreaming efforts, and they might unlock some potential for resource mobilization as well. So let us dive a little bit deeper into each of these sectors. So agriculture is, of course, one of the highest priority. It was also flagged by our colleague from WWF. And how do we integrate biodiversity and ecosystem services into our agricultural production? So as you can see, the vast majority of countries under BioDev 2030 have some actions involved in the agricultural sector. And when we look at the various subsectors where these are concentrated, we're seeing that it's about wheat production, sugarcane, cotton, cereals, kava, rice, vegetable crops, coffee, livestock. Also, it applies to all kinds of things, but we want to see what are the key challenges. So we want to understand that it's critical. The mainstreaming on agriculture is critical for increasing and improving agricultural, forestry, and even fisheries production in a more sustainable manner. And also, we need to be able to develop a sustainable agriculture that is capable of meeting the food demands while still being able to protect biodiversity. And this is also something that we need to understand, is that agriculture and biodiversity are extremely linked. They cannot be, they can't be one without the other. And the mutual benefits and the synergies between these two can also be exploited with what we call ecological intensification. So this ecological intensification, it's based on identifying solutions that are derived from the utilization of local resources like agrobiodiversity and adapting it to the species, habitat, and to the ecosystem. So for this, we need to better understand the different biological interactions that happen in that ecosystem and understand it as an agro ecosystem. So the other sector that is discussed among countries are fisheries, and how the protection of biodiversity should be a major priority of fisheries in post-2020 GBF. So we have Mozambique, Senegal, and Fiji who are looking into it from the BioDev 2030 sectors, especially for crab and shrimp fishing, but also artisanal fisheries and coastal fisheries. And so the main challenges of mainstreaming in fisheries is that we see a rising relevance of cross-sectoral collaboration, so that we can try and resolve this historical conflict between fisheries and environmental concerns, especially with regards to stocks. So many target populations are not yet managed sustainably, so there are shortages, and also this creates a wider variety of biodiversity concerns. So since the fish stocks have declined because there is a discrepancy between available fish stock and the fishing effort being deployed, then we need to we need to accept and develop more socially inclusive approaches, more bio-friendly approaches with strong conservation interest to be able to maintain sustainable fishing and sustainable access to fishing resources. And when we look at the third sector, forestry. Forestry is, of course, a key habitat for biodiversity and provides a wide variety of ecological services that are important to all of us. And a lot of countries from BioDev 2030 are involved in this sector, as you can see. So we see that there is a mounting evidence that biodiversity is necessary for the proper functioning of forest ecosystem and the supply of ecosystem services, because they host so much biodiversity and are a key critical component of sustainable forest management. But there has been a lot of illegal and uncontrolled logging, and this is a problem that is all worldwide, not just in the countries that have chosen to tackle this issue. And it causes significant damages to forests. And this has actually been flagged in several reports, and not least the UN Strategic Plan for Forests 2017-2030, that underlines the importance of forest in order for us to be able to sustain biodiversity. So we need to develop more socially inclusive approaches, including with the consideration to local communities and indigenous people, in order for that biodiversity habitat that is the forestry sectors to be preserved. Another key economic sector that has been approached is the one of energy. because the energy sector, from production to utilization to its infrastructure, impacts biodiversity in various ways. And basically, the main challenges is that the generation and the production and also the distribution systems of energy for fossil or non-fossil sources have always had deep negative impacts on biodiversity. And we're also talking about the disposal of waste products that are produced by the energy sector, which is also a major cause of concern. So there are many indirect impacts from this energy sector. So there are also multiple routes through which we can try and integrate and mainstream biodiversity into it, from the different infrastructure demands, from the way it generates revenue and royalties, and how that can be used and reused for biodiversity preservation, or at least to mainstream biodiversity into decision-making production processes. And also the fact that the trends towards shifting to more renewable energy resources that can be leveraged as an opportunity to not only fight climate change, but also considerably reduce biodiversity loss. So mining, another key sector. It reaches above a wide range of activities in different economic sectors that are involved in exploration, extraction, and the processes of various minerals. However, and as a lot of countries from BioDev 2030 countries have identified, most of it is poorly managed. And because of that, the impact on the environment, on biodiversity, with all the pollution and the damage that is caused, is very real and important. So basically, not only the impact that the mining industry has, but also there is a lot of evidence that the same industry should also be reliant on a healthy ecosystem, because they need clean water, they need natural protection for some of their sites. And basically, it requires companies that are involved in mining to have a more sustainable approach by understanding better and appreciating the value of biodiversity, not only with regards to the long-term operations of what they do with regards to the extraction process, but also the impact it has to the surrounding local communities and local ecosystems of the work. So there is a lot of sustainable approaches that are dependent on minerals that are also impacting the future technology use and even present technology used. And we talked about lithium, which is what is mostly used to create batteries for electric vehicles. So they have a role to play with regards to how we try to transition towards more green economies. But also we need to have a stronger business approach with regards to the biodiversity management around the mining industry. And how can we inform them better so that they can make informed decisions with regard to their impact, but also to the potential that they have of developing solutions for a better ecosystem management and less of an impact. Lastly, another very, very interesting sector that was considered is infrastructure. And of course, when we talk about infrastructure, we're not only talking about man-made infrastructure, but also natural infrastructure, which are the ecosystem and the landscape that surrounds us. And Cameroon and Mozambique are looking into it as part of BioDev 2030 initiatives. So many different challenges with regard to this. We have water and sanitation systems, transportation systems, electricity, buildings, telecommunication, all of this, which is producing a lot of activity, a lot of waste, and taking up a lot of space, which are sometimes natural habitats. So it's closely linked to biodiversity. But also, if you want to have a long-lasting infrastructure that is resilient, you also need to surround it by a healthy ecosystem. And so the services and the benefits given by that ecosystems, by nature, by biodiversity, is really something that that should be looked closely into, and biodiversity should be more mainstreamed so that they can see how infrastructure has the potential to have more influence on terrestrial ecosystems and biodiversity, and creating the linkages between the people that are reliant on the infrastructure just as much as they are on biodiversity. So once this interaction is a little bit more mainstreamed, integrated, then we can have a little bit more of forward-thinking infrastructures and develop sustainable techniques for future developments of infrastructure. And this is really true for the countries that are involved in BioDev 2030, because they are going to see a lot of rise in population. So a lot of need of rising number of infrastructure, and probably very heavy urbanization. Now, if we look at that from another issue, and how do we link all of it's been established that that we need a lot more resources. It has also been said by our colleague from WWF earlier. This significant increase of resources that is needed also needs to be paired with a more nature positive approach to the switch of financial flows. And basically, if we want to have a successful biodiversity conservation approach and be able to implement the GBF, then we need to mainstream biodiversity across all social and economic sectors and policies. Why? Because we need to look at the different ways that it impacts on the resources, mobilizing of resources that we need. So there is a grasp. We need to understand how to grasp the existing status and trends in biodiversity financing. And this is something that we'll also have the chance to look at in tomorrow's session. But there are different models of financing from funding partners, of course, and donor agencies. And we look at various public resources, but we also need to look at alternative routes, maybe more towards private resources, and how we can leverage also indirect types of financing. So the management of financial resources with an improved efficiency is key, so that we have a proper application of strategies and implementation of the GBF at the national level. And so this will come with more and more requests for co-financing, especially from the private sector in the variety of sectors that we discussed previously. And the reason for that is that public funding and donor funding alone will never be close enough to match the required needs for us to implement the GBF. So if we have a good mainstreaming strategy and we are able to further mainstream biodiversity in the key economic sectors, then we have a chance in an actual implementation of the GBF and the CBD in general. But it requires that we comprehensively mainstream biodiversities in all social and economic sectors, and that all of the key actors and decision makers are integrating these thoughts in their policy. So we've seen now, and we are getting closer now maybe to today's and tomorrow's exercise, that there are some common identified challenges across all of the different sectors that all the countries are working on. We see that there is some inadequate capacities and some lacks in the institutional frameworks. We see that there are budgetary limitations and there is a lack of intersectoral coordination. We see that investment in biodiversity is not appreciated enough and that there is not awareness about it. And this is basically what is the main challenge of mainstreaming biodiversity, is giving it enough value so that it's automatically integrated in the system, in the decision-making mechanisms, in the financing mechanisms. But also, there is not enough information. We need better systems for data collection and monitoring of the impacts on biodiversity so that we can have better policy support. And this has been highlighted by a few countries already. And of course, there are also some issues about biodiversity and ecosystems valorization, sorry. And when we think about what the added advantages that are considered by policymakers, investment bankers, economists that are trying to tackle very important issues like the development of jobs, food security, developing the GNP, having higher experts. There are some aspects of biodiversity that are not taken into example, like like ecosystem services, the uniqueness of the ecosystem through endemism, or some species that could actually provide a higher value, but they are not taken into account because traditionally we have not done so. And this is also what mainstreaming should be about. So basically the opportunities, and this is what is taking us closer in that last stand, that is the OEG 4 in Nairobi. We need these mainstreaming opportunities to be tailored to specific needs in each sectors, but also to identify where win-win solutions are available. For this, we need better coordination across the different sectors about between the different interest groups and between all of the stakeholders. And this is not something that is key, because we've seen it before when there has been a globally accepted, let's say, failure to achieve the Aichi biodiversity targets. We need far more collaboration between governments and non-state actors, and especially the key players on the ground that are leading the economic sectors. The reason for that is that we won't be able to deliver and implement a strong post-2020 global biodiversity framework if we fail to do so. And we know that there is a lot of, there is an anticipated expansion of key sectors that strongly affect biodiversity. There will be more agriculture, more forestry use, more fishing and aquaculture. And this is posing a more and more significant threat. And the various global reports are underlining very, very clearly. So we need to reverse these trends. We need to be more proactive with regards on how we mainstream biodiversity so that its importance is understood and it's taken into account, but also the opportunities that it provides with regards to generating more value and possibly more resources are taken into account. And this will come by putting key stakeholders, the policymakers, financial institutions, civil society, and the businesses all together. So what can the countries that are represented, and their partners, of course, in BioDev 2030 project, what can they achieve? Well, first of all, there is a unique position that is provided by BioDev 2030, is that you've all been able to work in key sectors and develop some very interesting either pilot cases, researches, studies, policy changes that provide a unique opportunity to have multiple angles towards this same issue, but you can also speak in a single voice because there is a lot of coordinated action. And today is one example where we are all sharing ideas on mainstreaming and its linked to resource mobilization. So this exchange of perspectives and different ideas based on your individual national experience can be projected onto the international scene. Why? Because they usually listen to us as groups, as regional groups, as interest groups. And basically, if we can find common denominators, we've identified common challenges, so maybe we can find common solutions and propose them. And having this common sense, all the countries together that are bounded by this understanding of the importance of biodiversity mainstreaming can help to strengthen regional harmony and engagement. And when many countries speak in a single voice, it considerably strengthens the influence of the negotiation power as well. So if we have a common understanding of the realities, and that has been also said by all the colleagues of the state of biodiversity today, and we can identify common trends, good practices of mainstreaming, and understand the common trends of resource mobilization that we can put to a better use for better planning, and ensure that the mainstreaming yields positive results, then, and perhaps only then, can we implement the post-2020 GBF effectively. So now, before I close, we're going to be very soon separated into group stages that we will all be animating, my colleagues and I. And there are some ideas that we can discuss. With regards to resource mobilization, we can ask some question on how can we leverage additional financing and mobilize resources from other sectors, especially the private sectors and the economic sectors that we've covered just before, to enhance the mainstreaming of biodiversity as part of the overall objective of supporting the implementation of the GBF. But for that, what needs to change with regards to policy and institutional arrangements, and how can modification of this current system facilitate better implementation of financial solutions to mobilize these resources? What needs to change at the local level? We need to figure that out. We need that to be discussed. With regards to biodiversity mainstreaming, what can change at the policy level, but also with regards to practices for both public and private actors to better promote conservation and sustainable use of natural resources? And what can we find as incentives for those key actors that we've identified previously, especially from the private sector, to be more mobilized and better mainstream biodiversity into their sectors? There are different experiences. You have country-specific examples in your countries, and some of you have built some models of successful biodiversity mainstreaming. They should be aired, and they should be used as good example. We will also be discussing about the main challenges you have identified at the country level, so that we can pair them, we can gather those that are similar, and see that we face very similar problems in our individual countries, but not only individual countries, maybe even in issues that are sector specific, especially with regards to those that are shared by a lot of countries like mining and agriculture. And basically, what would be great is also that we explore the advantages of regional cooperation through initiatives like BioDev 2030. When you develop a common program, you develop a common understanding. So all of this can help build a common vision going into the last stretches to defend the ideas of mainstreaming biodiversity for the post-2020 GBF, but also to find alternate ways to mobilize resources and use them more efficiently. So I wish you excellent group work. This is the end of the presentation prepared by myself and Mr. Olivier Rukundo, that you know very well. And we thank you very much for your patience and look forward to the next step of our work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, for this very comprehensive review of the note and of the link between the negotiation and the sectoral commitment which are going on in BioDev 2030. So we wanted to have a very long time for question and answers, but unfortunately we are a little bit late, but we still have 5 to 10 minutes. So if we can have just a few questions, and we will have a shorter break, and then we'll go back to the subgroups. But let's take just like three questions just for you to ask some clarification or some burning questions. I do not see any hand raised. So everything was very clear. Okay, so there's no burning question here. Oh, okay. So okay, so it's Mr. Melese Mario from Ethiopia. I see your video.
Yes, thank you very much. I thank all the presenters and I appreciate their presentation. It's a very, really exciting presentations and the share of knowledge and experience as they brought, supported by the scientific findings. Thank you so much. Maybe some kind of a clarity question I do have is, you say in our negotiation, CVD negotiation, people claim about the nature-based solution, even though many people accept it, and they stated that this nature-based solution, the term itself or the phrase somebody can say is not integrated or incorporated into the CVD language. So many people are not accepting with this regard. I mean, some, not many people, but some parties, I mean. Rather, they prefer to say ecosystem-based approach. Already it was integrated into the CVD documents. So with this regard, how to bring this nature-based solution concept into the CVD is the big concern, maybe as a part of concern for us. Another concept is while talking about the agriculture, one of our presenter, the Ali, presented pastoral livestock as one of the traits of from the agricultural sector. So why it was specified as pastoral? In my country, Ethiopia, even if you say in non-pastoral area, the livestock is a threat. Let me show you that many people, about more than 75% of the population is living, especially the peasants, the farmers are living in the highland area. And my country, the largest population of livestock as compared to the other African countries. So with this regard, why you limit only for the pastoral area? And I think generally it's better to say livestock by itself is a trait, wherever it is a pastoral or non-pastoral area. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your questions and remarks, because it was in both ways. And so I think that what you mentioned about there were several points. The first point is that there is some new ideas, new concept that I brought into the negotiations and the discussion. So maybe we can ask for clarification. I think in the specific case of nature-based solutions, I think that if it was brought into the negotiation, it was because it's been a long time since we are talking about nature-based solutions. And so we were just talking around and trying to talk about these, but not calling them properly nature-based solutions, because it was the first time we mentioned nature-based solution was, I think, in 2009 in Copenhagen. So it was a long time ago, and then it's starting to be more and more understood. And then just this year, there was a UN definition adopted of nature-based solution. It was an IUCN born concept, let's say so. And now the UNDP adopted a definition, and so CBD wanted to integrate this new definition. So this was about nature-based solution, and I will let Vicky give more detail about that, because she's IUCN and she can be more specific, I think.
Yes, thanks, Pauline. So yeah, just to complement the fact that, yes, it's been controversial. There has been a lot of reticence to use the term nature-based solutions in the CBD because it has not been internationally agreed. Even though that it has a definition that was adopted by IUCN's members, NGOs, and state members, but it's true that in the setting of the CBD has not been the case. Now we, like Pauline mentioned, this year during the UN Environmental Assembly, the UNEA, a definition based largely on our definition has been adopted. So we have an understanding of what nature-based solutions are. Some of the concerns raised is that the term can be misused and cause a lot of in detriment of nature, actually. But for that, IUCN not only proposes that the nature-based solutions come back into the framework, but we also put to everyone, we developed these IUCN nature-based solution standards. So the aim of the nature-based solution global standard is to provide a framework to standardize nature-based solutions approaches, to ensure also that nature-based solutions responds to stakeholder rights, upholding the rights of indigenous peoples to free, prior, and informed consent. That it also prevent unanticipated negative outcomes of misuse of nature-based solutions, but also it will help funding agencies and policymakers and other stakeholders assess the effectiveness of nature-based solutions implementation. So that's, and it's not only for climate change, even though it has initially was associated with climate change, and it has been the case also in the framework, but it also provides a host of other benefits. It addresses many challenges, including food security. So I hope that clarifies.
Thank you, Vicky, for this clarification. And Ali or Olivier, do you want to complete this answer?
Yes, maybe Pauline, if I may just add on to something very quickly with regards to this discussion on nature-based solution. And thank you, Melissa, good to see you, that you're raising this question. It is indeed true that in the last meetings, the Geneva conference, the discussion on this issue were actually sort of polarized as to the definition of this term and how to use it. And part of the issue that was brought to those who are not in favor of it is basically stating that this nature-based solution term is not defined. There are other terms that are more appropriate that have been defined by the Conference of the Parties and the subsidiary bodies of the CBD, and others are stating that it is a term that is actually defined in other conventions and fora that could actually sort of bow well and speak well to the sort of the what is needed in terms of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So I just wanted to add on to this, perhaps that it's something that will be still center of the discussions in in the upcoming meeting, fourth meeting of the open-ended working group, as there's no closure, there hasn't been no closure with regards to this. There's been some consideration on how the term can be used, its relevance, and the term has been bracketed in all the decisions and recommendations. So I just wanted to flag for those, as this is also meant to be a preparation for the upcoming meeting of the open-ended working group, that it will be also essential to reflect how this fits in terms of the country's position with regards to this term. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this compliment. And so I think that now it's the time for a break. Can you please stay connected to the link, and we can, because we are a little bit late, we can have a 5-minute break. Is that so? And we come back in 5 minutes and start the breakout groups discussion. Ali and Olivier, is that okay for you?
Perfect.
Okay, so let's have a 5-minute break to have a glass of water, and then coming back at 2:40 to start the breakout group discussion. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Are you back from the break? So, are you all back? All the camera are switched off.
Hello.
Hello. Well, I see that there are people who were there before the break and who are missing. So maybe we can start the breakout groups and then I will contact them for them to come back. And so we are starting the breakout groups. And so there will be one group for English-speaking partners and one group for French-speaking partners. Donc, nous allons commencer les discussions en sous-groupes et nous allons séparer en fonction de la langue de préférence. Donc, il y aura un sous-groupe en français et un sous-groupe en anglais. Alors, Ali, tu vas aller dans quel sous-groupe?
Peu importe. Je peux prendre celui en anglais si vous voulez, pas de souci.
Ok, donc Olivier, je te mets dans le groupe en français et Ali en anglais. Alors, je vais vous affecter tous dans les sous-groupes. I'm gonna just send you to the subgroups. Okay, so Ali will be in English with Anna, with Busso, with here, the first group.
Yes, hello. Hello, everybody. I assume this is the English group. Can you all hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Me too.
All right. Perfect. So please confirm that you've been assigned to me as the English group. I see Melesso.
Je pense qu'il s'agit du groupe francophone, par contre.
Ah bon, parce qu'il y a des anglophones, Pauline. Il y a Monsieur Melessé, par exemple.
Ok. En fait, Madame Carla Eboulia est du Gabon, Monsieur Simon Patamken du Cameroun. Ici, c'est le groupe en français, Monsieur Giganga du Congo et Madame Lalana de Madagascar, c'est en français. Donc, je vais juste assigner Monsieur Melessé dans le groupe anglais. Voilà, ici, c'est le groupe francophone. Vous pouvez rester ici. Ici, c'est le groupe francophone.
Très bien, merci Pauline.
Donc, Olivier, je te laisse entamer la discussion. J'affecte juste Monsieur Melessé. Je ne sais pas pourquoi il n'est pas dans la salle parce qu'il est affecté dans l'autre salle normalement, mais je vais... Ah, OK. Mr. Melessé, you have to accept to join the other room.
Yeah, yes, please.
Yes, I assigned you to the room 1. So you have to click on the button to join the English speaker room. I have assigned you to the English.
To Oliver, you assigned me to Oliver?
No, to Ali's room. It's room 1.
Okay.
Yes, Dr. Melesse, I think it's just a button to confirm that you've actually accepted to join the other group. It's just a button that you click on your, probably on your right-hand side.
Yeah.
So which button is that?
Okay, so it should state that you've been assigned to a group and then you accept to join the group and you'll be redirected there.
Okay, unfortunately, so the button is not coming. Okay, it says
Okay.
Parfait. Donc, bonjour à tout le monde. Nous allons pouvoir commencer. Pauline, si tu es d'accord. Je pense que M. Melessé a été affecté dans l'autre groupe. Alors, normalement, il y était, mais je vois qu'il est revenu. Mais je vais... ce que je vais faire, c'est que je vais peut-être vous adresser dans une autre salle. Et puis, dans la plénière, il n'y aura personne. Parce qu'au début, je m'étais dit que j'allais... et je vais vous affecter dans une autre salle. Comme ça, ce sera plus simple. Hop. Tac. Alors... Voilà. Donc là, normalement, c'est la salle 2 qui est la salle. You have to click on the button to accept the room. Antonin, you should accept the room 2.
Hello, Pauline.
Yeah, hello.
My assignment was to room 2, isn't it?
No, your assignment is to room 1. So I'm going to reassign you to room 1. Your assignment in English.
Okay, thank you.
Room 1.
Please assign me. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Now you are assigned to room 1. Do you see it? I think that's good. Okay. And Simon? Simon, do you hear us? Well, I think